Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on your Sunday afternoon. We are super excited to see you all. We have some returning faces here and new faces as well. My name is Ayaka, and I am a consultant with LSAT Unplugged. And I have been with LSAT Unplugged, being in their courses, studying the LSAT, and, in the process of applying to law school since last summer, when I first discovered Steve's YouTube classes, and I was like, I need to be in those classes. So I kind of sneaked on the YouTube, sneaked onto some public sessions, and eventually made it into Steve's courses. There, I met Alyssa.
You know what I was gonna say, Ayaka, too, is didn't you do like you kind of said like you did some sneaking, but it felt when I last spoke to you about it, like that you did like a lot of research. You were like really trying to figure out like what's going on with LSAT Unplugged before you like pulled the trigger, I guess you could say, and join the course.
Definitely. And, LSAT Unplugged has different, levels of courses and all that. And it's some sort of, at any level, it's a monetary investment. So, and I work full time. I need to know my money is going to work for me. So I did a lot of research. I was creeping on the Facebook page a lot as well. And in a public session, I saw you, Alyssa. I know I saw you in class and we DM'd each other. So that's kind of how I got started in LSAT Unplugged. I've, gone through the course for the LSAT. And then when I started to do the application process, essays, all of that, I just fell in love. I love writing essays. I love this sort of essay type, diversity statement, personal statement, all of that. And I got really obsessed with the admissions process. And Steve provided Alyssa and I and a lot of the TAs, teaching assistants for the LSAT Unplugged course, opportunities to interview law school admissions. And that's kind of where this process has accelerated for me. I got to know a lot more about the admissions process, and Alyssa the same. So we really wanted to share this information with you guys who are going into this process with us. So Alyssa, let me hand it over to you so you can introduce yourself and we can kick it off.
Nice. Hey, everyone. My name is Alyssa. And as Ayaka said, we met in the LSAT Unplugged course. I have been working closely with Steve for over a year now. And as she said, the moment that we started to interview admissions officers, I sort of had like an aha moment, because as much as I was sort of like diving deep into the process for myself, once I started to hold interviews with these officers, I realized like there's just so much information. I myself am a low income, underrepresented minority. People will say URM. I have a lot of different things going on for me. And I'm also was on scholarship for Steve's LSAT Unplugged course. A lot of people don't know that if you have an LSAC waiver, you do have a scholarship automatically into Steve's course for a discounted fee. And I like to share that with everyone. I like to shout it from the mountaintops and let everyone know. So I'm going to go ahead and throw something up on my screen right now. Ayaka and I, let's see if I think everyone can see that. This is just like what's going on today. So we're just going to do a little bit of introductions, figure out where everyone is at. Please feel free to write questions in the chat at any time during this hour. We're going to give you an example timeline for where you should be out if you're applying to a fall 22 admission cycle. We're also going to cover some frequently asked questions. We get a lot of questions on letters of recommendation. How many drafts should someone be writing for each individual essay? And also a lot of questions pop up about addendums. We keep getting a lot of questions about that. We're going to cover just a little bit about that. I'm going to talk about how to get the most out of your essays and share everything I've learned with you thus far. And then we're going to open up the floor for personalized questions. We have already received quite a few personalized questions, hyper personalized, I would say, in our email inbox. If you ever need anything, you can email us at admissions@lsatunplugged.com. I just threw that in the chat. You can always ask questions in the chat as Ayaka and I present. You can also leave your questions for the end of the session. I have a feeling we're not going to get to everyone's question. So if you want to just copy and paste that email right now and save it somewhere, I really recommend you do so. Ayaka and I are here by volunteer. We want to share what we've learned so badly with everyone else. We just take this on as the two of us. So we're not here. There's not anybody else in the LSAT Unplugged course that is doing quite the exact same that the two of us have in terms of the obsession with admissions. So just let us know if you have any questions. With that being said, Ayaka, do I have to stop sharing my screen for the next thing to happen? Okay. All right. So Ayaka's going to throw something up for everyone. I hope that this works. Okay.
All right.
All right. We have a poll going right now. Oh my goodness. So which cycle are you applying to? We have people that are clicking either fall 22, fall 23, or fall 24 and beyond, which I would imagine like a fall 23 or fall 24 and beyond. Maybe you're still in your undergraduate program and you're thinking a little bit ahead, which good for you. Nice. Okay.
Very cool.
Fantastic.
Let's just share the results. So a majority of us here, we're applying this fall for admissions to next fall. And, you know, or those of you who are doing the research ahead of time, great. And, you know, as expected, not a lot in the fall 24 and beyond.
Nice. We have a question in the chat. Do we think that it's going to be similar to last cycle? Quote unquote, heard it was pretty brutal. All I'm going to say is that historically, if the economy is not doing well, people go and get more education. That is, I didn't make that up. That's just historically what's happened. So yeah, there are going to be more applications coming in for this cycle than maybe the years prior. Absolutely recommend that anyone Google it if they're interested. There's a lot of information out there, for example, post the 2008 economic crash. I hope I'm using that language right, but there's going to be more applications. That's why Ayaka and I are telling you everything we know, because we want to help you out. So Ayaka, do you want to take the floor and the example timeline?
Sure. Let's hit next on that. So, you know, those of us who are applying to fall 22 admissions, I'm sure you all know admissions is rolling. That can mean that you want to be, you know, applying the first day that applications are open. That could mean you are, that can mean that you are waiting until the deadline to apply. There's different ranges of people who are applying, you know, when that range has opened up, especially in the last year because of COVID, and there's just a lot of people applying. So a lot of schools accepted until their, you know, class was full until June, end of June, and you know, there were people who were getting acceptances past June. So really, you really want to think about when you want to apply. Alyssa and I like to say, you know, if you really want to, you know, have the most opportunity for scholarships, which is important, law school is expensive, and for, you know, placement opportunity. So, you know, maybe there's a REACH school that you're going to, you're applying to, there's a school that's your dream school. You really want to apply early. That doesn't mean you have to apply on the first day that the applications are open. That's not what I've heard from admissions officers, but early really means before December, or before, you know, depending on the school and when their admissions opens, before January. So really within this year is really when you want to apply if you're thinking of scholarships and your placement opportunity. So Alyssa, hit next. So this is kind of a mock schedule of what, you know, you would look at for applying this cycle for admissions for fall 22. And really right now, if you haven't taken the LSAT already, you really want to be familiar with the test, doing practice tests, all of that. Right now you should have, or you are asking for letters of rec right now. In August, you really want to have your drafts for your personal statements, at least the first 1 or 2 drafts done. Going into the fall, you're really going to be working on your essays. And also, if you're still looking to take your LSATs, doing practice tests weekly, multiple practice tests weekly, so you get the timing down, all of that. October is probably the latest you want to go if you're applying before December. Your LSAT test, you want to test in October. It's not too late to test in January, absolutely not. But if you are kind of targeting the before January date, October is probably there. And then get that writing portion done, which is the writing sample that goes with your LSAT. Do not forget to do that because that will delay your score. And then hopefully you get your application in that November timeframe. So this is kind of a sample timeframe. Not everyone's going to fall under this, but this is kind of trying to give you enough time to study, to work on your essays, including personal diversity addendas, all the essays out there. You want to get them done in a timely manner and turn it all in. Most schools, you probably know, will not look at your application until you have every piece in. So even let's say, you've deferred your LSAT to January, your whole application will be deferred until January until you get that score in. So be very careful about how you think this out. There's students out there who say, oh, I can crank out an essay in 2 weeks. So they're not going to worry about it. Great if you can do that. I have yet to see a student successfully do a thought out essay in 2 weeks. So really give yourself enough time and think about how much time it's going to take you to do the LSAT, to practice, to write your essays, to edit, all of that.
I think that you've pointed out something really important, Ayaka, in where we've both seen this go a little stray in terms of people's mindset is, for example, they might think, okay, I'm going to take my LSAT in October, so I'm going to put all my marbles in that bucket, and I'm going to study for the LSAT like hell. And then as soon as I'm done with my LSAT, then I'm going to work on my essays, which is completely fine. But if you are taking your LSAT in October, for example, and you do crank out a rough draft in 2 weeks, I would strongly urge that every single one of your essays is looked at by 4 to 5 different people. And I just want everyone to I said this in was it Wednesday's class, or when I was like, think about how hard it is sometimes to get someone to text you back. Like they might not even respond to a text message in a week. So if your mindset is that you want to get your essays done and you want 4 to 5 people to critically look at it and really dive deep and really care about your application, and then for you to actually implement those ideas that those 4 to 5 people have given for you for each of your essays, that's going to take more time than from October to say December. It really just is. People are getting ready for their holiday season. Something else that I like to bring up with maybe, for example, professors with letters of recommendation is that you might not be asking for letters of recommendation right now. Say that you ask for letters of recommendation when the school year starts or the semester starts and you're asking from professors. I would be prepared for your professor to say, great, I'm going to write that during Thanksgiving break, or I'm going to write that during Christmas break. So you have to sort of be in the mindset of their workload, which is why we've kind of given you so much. We have a lot of questions in the chat. Ayaka, are any of them?
Yeah, I'll address the letter of rec one quickly. I know we're going to touch on it soon, but most schools, especially if you've been out of school for 3+ years, they're going to say, you know what, you can use a professional letter of rec. However, it is recommended to have a academic letter of rec as well. I said in a class a long time ago around letters of rec that I've been on a 5-year journey with a professor to kind of make sure that he knows that I do want a letter of rec from him if and when I do apply to law school. And this year was like, I was like, hey, this is the year I'm applying. We've gone on this journey for 5 years and we are there. So, some people have that relationship with the professor, some people don't. Just know that professors are kind of used to having people pop up a few years after graduation and say, hey, I need a letter of rec to this school that I'm applying to. So I would not fear approaching a professor when you can. I think if they can speak to how you are, how you show up in the classroom, that's a really strong letter of rec that can really help make your case to say, hey, you can integrate back into the classroom and be a powerful voice in that classroom. But I would also suggest having professional letters of rec in there as well, previous boss, or someone who's worked closely with you, that can speak to your work ethic and all of that. So go ahead.
The most important thing about your letter of recommendation is that that person knows you very well and can write in detail about either who you are, what your character is, maybe tell a story that shows a better side of you. That you don't want a family member. Never have a family member, or never have somebody who has a better title but doesn't know you as well. So there's definitely a balance there.
Yeah, and I'm not skipping over you, Vika, but we'll get to that question in a second. Kenna,
I've answered kind of a few questions in here, so
I see that. I think it would be good to be able to come back to that conversation with the professor and say, hey, I think I'm planning to apply to law school at some point in the future. I would love to have a letter of rec with you, and kind of check in, have that conversation with that professor, because it's easier to ask if you have a relationship with the professor that hasn't been stale for the last 5 years, right? It's so much easier to say, hey, you remember when I asked for that letter of rec sometime in the future? This year's the year. So really be open to have that conversation, and understand that, it might not happen for another 5 years, or it might happen in a year, right? And just keep that door open.
Ayaka, that's what you've done.
Yeah.
Like, wait a second. Ayaka, you have just the most brilliant story. And a lot of people, I know I did not know this. I had no idea during my undergrad that I could be creating relationships for letters of recommendation. I had no idea I was going to be interested in law school ever. So it's not a make or break, but it definitely helps a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And Reno, I know you're asking, is it inappropriate to view letters of rec before they submit on LSAC? The LSAC will ask you whether you want to view that letter. I don't, just because it could change the integrity of the letter.
Right. I would absolutely, there's an option to waive your viewing of it. I would strongly recommend that you waive your viewing of it. Depends on your relationship with the person, though. They might be really nice, but formally.
Yeah. And, after your application, after you're admitted, you are able to look at your application with the letters of rec as well. So if you're curious, you can go that route. If you're nervous about someone not writing you a strong letter of rec, maybe you need to change who you ask for a letter. I've addressed a lot of letters of rec. If you have any more questions, feel free to put it in the chat. The big questions that we get around essays. So, your application essays, there's personal statement, diversity statement, addendas, there's hardship essays for some schools, there's, creative essays some schools ask for. And a lot of times we get asked more than we want. How many drafts do I need to do? Or how long do I need to work on my essay? And it's not going to be great, but it really depends. You really want to give yourself enough time and enough drafts to develop an idea and put it articulately into a 2-page essay. That's technically what a personal statement would be. Diversity statement may be shorter or the same length. It's really hard to put a cohesive story and your why law school and all of these things about yourself into 2 pages, right? 2 pages double spaced, so it's really 1 page single spaced, and that's super hard. Nobody believes that that's everything about you in 2 pages. That's enough, right? There's 1,000 pages you could write about yourself, absolutely. But you really want to give the essence of who you are, and that has to go through a lot of processing, and having other people look at your essays and writing multiple drafts and, changing the drafts over and over. So I don't want to give a number because it can give a false sense of security. But really, you need to give yourself time and space to be able to hone that message about who you are. over and over, admissions officers say, you know, the personal statement is where we get to know you as a person. Who are you? How are you going to show up in the classroom? How are you going to be as a lawyer? Do we want this person at the school, right? And so they're asking for more than stats. And if you can't give yourself enough time to write about who you are in a personal statement that's 2 pages,
you're probably not going to spend a lot of time on a paper in school.
Yeah, and really absolutely, do you really want that person to be showing up in your classroom? So really put the time into it, and think about how you want to show up on paper outside of, you know, the stats that you have, the GPA, the letters of rec, your resume, all of that.
I would even go so far. As Ayaka and I are friends, just so everyone knows. So I'm about to like directly give a number. She's like, I don't want to give a number because she doesn't want to give a false sense of security, which I absolutely agree with. But I would say at least 3. And Ayaka said it beautifully when we were chatting just one-on-one one time, where Ayaka said that a lot of times we see that people are trying to write their final draft within the first draft. Like there's a sense of like, all right, I'm going to write my essay now. And that first draft is like, you're trying to create something that's closer to an end result, but it really does take at least 3 different times of you going back and looking at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Last thing, we get a lot of questions about addendas. We had at least 4 people write in about addendas. So I know there's a lot of questions out there. The addenda, this is a place where you can kind of asterisk explain and explain some things in your application. Now, there was a piece of advice that the director of admissions at GW Law gave, and he said, you know, what you decide to put into your application is important. What you don't decide to put in is also important, and it says a lot about you, right? If you are explaining every single B you got in your resume or in your transcript, that's a little excessive. And you really want to think out why are you writing that, right? It also calls attention to it. So maybe that 1 B- you got in freshman year isn't a big red flag for them, but if you were over explaining it in an addenda, you are calling attention to it. And do you really want someone to really think about that for a long time? There are really good explanations out there about, you know, you had difficulty in your family, you had a gap in your undergrad because, you know, you had to take care of someone or you got sick. Those are absolutely valid addendas that should be written, but nothing, you know, it should be matter of fact. It should be very straightforward, no flowery language. You really want to be straightforward about it and make it not sound like an excuse.
One of the best things I ever heard about what to include, what not to include comes from Dean Z from University of Michigan Law. She has her own YouTube channel. I have a link to it in a following slide that I'm going to put up for you all. It's really fantastic, but she put it really nicely. Like we've gotten a lot of questions on like, do I include all my parking tickets? Do I include my outstanding balance at my undergrad because I forgot about this one textbook and I lost it? Like, do I include being arrested but not being charged? Like that is very gray waters. There are a lot of questions that can come up. The number one thing to think about, and I've gotten this directly from DNC, is the school is generally asking you about things that will come up for bar passage. So if the school is asking you, so for example, have you been charged? If you've been arrested but not charged, you do not have to necessarily disclose that you've been arrested. Now, you want to follow directions perfectly. Follow the directions of what the school is asking for. And if you have any sort of lingering questions, email the school and go a step farther. You can email your state's bar. You can really email them. So ask those questions and kind of figure out what's going there. But you don't have to include something like, I have 20 tickets if that's never really coming up, or just really think about it and ask a lot of questions.
Yeah, and Alyssa, I do want to make the distinction between character and fitness and the addenda. So addenda really you want to talk about if you have something on your academic record that is, you had a gap year, or, a semester where your, grades went down a little bit just because, you got sick, something like that. That's totally fine to include in your addenda. Something that, you were charged with, plagiarism, you went to jail for a day, anything like that, you really want to put in your character and fitness, because that will get caught in the bar. So, you really want to separate that out. Addenda is not a place for you to kind of spill your guts out and anything. Just make sure you know what the school's asking for.
Ayaka, chef's kiss. I agree. All right, I'm going to go on. Okay, so I'm talking about editing circles. What this slide is for is how to get the most out of your essays. This files into the questions that Ayaka mentioned above, like how many drafts do I write and when do I start writing my essays? There seems to be like a general lingering, maybe like fear that if you start your essays too soon, somehow it's going to get watered down, or different things like that. But this is an example of the different people that should and will be looking at your essays if you give it the amount of oomph that you should be giving it. As we mentioned at the top of the hour, when the economy starts to suffer, or for example, during a pandemic, when people's lives have been severely affected and changed, a lot of people seek higher education, applications go up. So you should be giving yourself all these different circles. So it starts with you. You're the one who writes your essay. In the next slide, I'm going to talk about ways that you can take your own essay from the first draft to the second draft. Different questions you can ask yourself before you give your essay off to someone else. Don't do what I did, which was really embarrassing. I just gave my essay to a million people after my first draft. I thought it was like the most amazing thing ever. It wasn't. It was very embarrassing. So after you look at your own essay, I'm going to tell you what you can do to take that up a level. Then you're going to give it to peers, but not just any peers. If you have peers that are committed to your success, that is a huge thing. It takes a lot of time and energy for someone to critically look at what you've written. If you're giving it to someone and they say, wow, what fantastic writing, you're a great writer. Number one, they're probably right. You probably are a great writer. But number two, that person isn't helping you like at all. Like, thank you very much for the attention, but that person is not helping you. So I'm going to give you kind of a list of questions that you can give to someone else, or you want to prep someone before you hand off your essay to them willy-nilly. There are people that are not applying to law school. There are people that are attorneys, but maybe they're not thinking about a law school admissions process. It is sort of a particular tone and style and structure that you need to be hitting, that if you're handing your essay off to someone who's not keyed into those ideas of what exactly it needs to say, you're not getting the best out of your time. They're not getting the best out of your time. The other thing is consultants. You would want someone who all they do all day long is read a lot of essays. They are reading a lot of essays going into law school applications. There's a lot of consultants that are for low income, like me, anybody like that. So it's not necessarily like you're having to spend a lot or a lot more time, but the biggest issue that is the reason why consultants are important is because they're strangers. They don't know your story. They don't know who you are. In the personal statement, as Ayaka hit on, you only have 2, sometimes 3. There is a school that I know that I've looked at that has a 3-page personal statement, but that school also has no diversity statement option. So you can see where that balance comes in there. You have only a limited amount of time to show who you are, which is why handing your essay over to strangers is really important, because the biggest circle admissions officers are strangers. They don't know you and they need to know. Gonna keep going. Let's see. All right, so questions to ask yourself. I would recommend that you do this before you even sit down and do a rough draft. It's gonna save you a lot of time and hardship, and I've learned this the hard way. You just don't even wanna know what I wish I had known a year ago. So ask yourself, why do I want to go to law school? Please ask yourself this every single day until you have a 2 to 3 sentence answer. For some people, it's really simple. For some people, especially, I find that like if you're somebody who's normally high achieving and you find yourself saying like, I want a challenge, that's not a good reason. If you're someone who has had a lot of career experience, or maybe you're a non-traditional student and you've just been burnt out by maybe like bad career experiences and you're just trying to make a better life for yourself, still not the clean cut reason. Like there has to be something. So keep asking yourself this, I would say, every single day. Another question, what are some career goals I have for myself? Ayaka, you and I kind of just touched base on this, that a lot of people in their personal statement will ask us, how do I tell this school specifically that I want to go to that school? And they like go to the website, read a few things about it, and then like start to try to plug it in their personal statement. Like you have like an internationally known faculty, and like they kind of like sound like they've swallowed a brochure. I cannot tell everyone in this session enough. Take some time to, yes, research your schools, but please take some time to research the job that you want. Because talking about your own career goals, talking about why you're going into law, or like imagining yourself in a space would be really helpful in your application if you could be moving from that space.
Yeah. And, a lot of people do kind of write, oh, you have this course or you have this professor there. And I remember same guy, I was talking to GW Law's admissions director, Mr. Matthew Dillard, and he was just like, we know who is on our faculty. We know how great we are. You don't need to hype us up in the essay. So don't talk about, like, don't swallow that brochure and regurgitate it to us.
Right. Don't hype up the school saying like you have the best this program. Like show us, don't tell us. Like show us what you're interested in. If you're interested in immigration law, like talk about maybe for example, like a law firm office who's doing the work that you could see yourself doing. Like that to me is a better, more researched candidate than just regurgitating what they're seeing on the website, saying like, I see this example doing the kind of work that I want to do, or like, this is how I envision myself in the career. And then going a step farther, you have to say, why do you want to do those things? And I can help more on that if anybody wants to email me and like talk about that. And then this is where we get to what stories can I share that show the above answers? A lot of times, and I used to be the culprit of this, and through working with Ayaka and through working with LSAT Unplugged, I really feel like I've nailed a better way to do this, because I'm one of those people, and I see a lot of people do it, where they are trying to move from the story first. They are maybe like, they're trying to pull out the most dramatic story they have in their life, or the most intense thing that they've ever gone through. And they're presenting that as the personal statement. And then they're having a hard time figuring out how that fits in with why law school. That, number one, everyone's intense stories are valid. And I want you to share that, because if it makes who you are, then please share it if it makes you who you are. But consider, is this my personal statement? Is this the reason why I want to go to law school? Or for example, is it a diversity statement? Is it an optional essay where you're saying, hey, I've been through this experience. This is what makes me also a very good candidate for law school. It can be something that makes you want to go to law school, but start at the top of this slide first, and you're going to have a much stronger essay. Ask yourself, have I stuck with 1 to 2 themes for personal essay? You really don't want to have your personal essay going a lot of different directions. This is not a pile up of saying like this happened and this happened and this happened and this happened. There are other places for that in the application. A personal essay is only, as we keep saying, 2 pages, sometimes 3, but it's really hard to showcase a billion things in just that amount of time. And have I written anything that is too general or sounds impressive but doesn't really mean anything? For example, if I were to say, like, we as a country are headed down a really bad road, and I want to be the person that like saves us all. Like, really good for a movie quote, just it does not work in a personal statement. It has to be really personal.
Alyssa, if I may jump in here, I think, we ask these questions, whenever we work one-on-one with the student as well, because we do want to steer students away from, common mistakes and common things that we see in an essay. Every one of us, when we see that personal statement, we start thinking about, that first paragraph. How do I hook the admissions into reading? And, I see it all the time. It's not a bad thing. But I think you need to think for yourself whether that hook is consistent with your message. And more times than not, and I mean like 9 out of 10 times, we are cutting that first paragraph in our first meeting working with a student. We're saying, hey, that's just unnecessary information. Let's cut to the chase. So really think about that. I think as a thought process and as a process of writing, you can write that hook just to get it out there. And, a lot of times we are cutting and adding and cutting and adding in the editing process. So, there's no bad way to start a draft. Write it. Eventually, we may cut it. You may cut it. You may be adding more things. Just know that it's a process. So you're never going to get it right on the first time unless you are an amazing final draft writer on your first try. I think, when we talk about themes, a lot of people talk about the most impactful story that they have that they think is impactful. The other way to think about it is, if you were to introduce yourself and talk about the first, tell me 10 things about yourself. Are you going to include that story in that introduction? This is an introduction of yourself to admissions. And if it's not going to be there, is it really, is that really who you are?
Yeah, like for context, Ayaka is mentioning that like we'll see essays where the first sentence is like, I was jumping out of plane and like on the way down, I was thinking about like my whole life. And then like it just switches and they're like, so anyway, I was in my school classroom, and we're like, what? It has to make sense and be a plumb line.
Absolutely.
Okay, so all of these different things, and I'm sure I forgot some, can all show different parts of you in a way that adds to your story. I absolutely cannot let anybody leave this session without the special star next to letters of recommendation and resume. If you are thinking of these items as a one and done because you're thinking of them as being, what's the word? Objective? What's it when it's like stuck in stone? When
set in stone, it's done. It's
somebody set in stone. If you think of your letter of recommendation and your resume as set in stone, fixed, Christina, coming through. If you think of these items as fixed, you're doing yourself dirty. Okay, like for example, we had a question above of like, can I ask to see the letter of recommendation before it's written? Imagine there's like a timeline of the letter of recommendation. That person might be thinking like, ask for the letter, then that person writes the letter, and then you're like, what was in the letter? That's not what you should be doing for yourself. You're applying to go to law school, which means that you are a mature, communicative adult, which means that you can ask your recommender to write things in the letter that might paint a portrait of you that maybe is not showing up somewhere else. For example, I have a background of being a classically trained professional dancer. If you see a resume or everything about me and my undergraduate degree that shows artist, you might not know about me that I'm also incredibly interested in books. I love to research. I have this other thing going on in my life. I'm allowed to have an adult, mature conversation before it gets to them writing the letter, where I ask them to write a letter about me. And then I ask, by the way, can you write about my extreme interest for research? Can you say that I'm extremely interested in research? And then that person can say no, or that person can say yes. And then I don't have to feel squeamish about figuring out what they wrote, because we're having conversations leading up to before they write it. Like we've come across an applicant where they're reapplying through the cycle. They have a stronger LSAT score. They want to rewrite their essays. And they told us, oh, my letters of recommendation are done. And my first question to them are they done? Or have you had conversations with your recommenders? Multiple conversations. It doesn't have to be like a fixed thing. Like, will you write it? Yes. And then you go away. Like, you wouldn't get married like that. Not to say it's the same thing as marriage, but you wouldn't be like, do you want to get married? Yes. You'd be like, you'd have conversations. So I really encourage everyone to, if somebody is close enough to you or you feel would write you a letter, also have enough courage and enough maturity to ask for a meeting before they write it. And you can come prepared with, hey, my whole application will make it look like I'm interested in only this. Could you write an anecdote about maybe how I'm a leader, or like so you want to look at the whole thing as a puzzle. If you're missing a quality that might not be apparent in your essays, on your resume, in your transcript, you can ask the person to write a story about that. Say, for example, you want them to write about the fact that like you have an incredible amount of empathy and like you have a server heart. Like talk to them about stories, like and ask them to do that. Same thing goes with your resume. It doesn't have to be fixed to what your professional work has been. You have an opportunity to show many stories of how you spend your time.
Absolutely. And I think what you said is, perfect. Of it's a puzzle and you really want to show, a really good picture of who you are. So these letters of rec, I have one that's coming from a professor from 6 years ago. And I sat down with him. I traveled to Berkeley. I'm in Portland right now. I was working in Tokyo at the time. I traveled to Berkeley and said, hey, can I get coffee with you? I really want to talk to you about this letter of recommendation. That's not necessary. I think it's a little bit extreme. I love this professor and I needed to catch up with him. But it's those people who will write you those glowing letters of recommendations, right? So you really want to get those. And I understand not everyone has a professor that they're super close with. Maybe it is an out of the blue ask for a professor, but it is not too late to start building that relationship and saying, hey, I really want to ask you for a letter of recommendation, but I also want to catch up with you and see how you've been doing. COVID's been really stressful and, I would love to catch up and kind of have that conversation so they feel a little bit more of a personal connection to you when writing that letter.
Beautifully said. And again, that takes time. So if you're kind of thinking to yourself that all these are going to be like one and done, it's just every single thing takes a little bit of time because you kind of have to have a built-in team of people that are going to help you get the application and show yourself the best. All right. These are questions that you can ask your peers if you hand it to them. Can you tell me why, in 2 to 3 sentences, why I want to go to law school? If you're handing them your personal statement, there's a difference between personal and diversity. And I think that we've said that before. So if somebody has a specific question, they can ask, is the story I'm telling easy to follow? This is harder to do than it seems. Ayaka likes to say that in our heads, we sort of know who like the characters are. Like, has anyone ever been watching a show like something like that has a lot of characters like a Grey's Anatomy or like Game of Thrones. And like if somebody comes and tries to sit down in the middle of a season, they're like, who's that? Who's that? And you're like, oh, that person, like they used to be married. Like it's almost impossible to share with someone like who all the characters are. That is how a lot of our personal statements come out because you know the characters of your life and you know kind of the circumstances from which that happened and why that was important. And it can be difficult to parse out in an easy to digest story in 2 pages what you're trying to say. That's why that question exists. And does this sound like me? The way I speak, think. One of my favorite examples of that question is Solomon, a teacher's assistant for LSAT Unplugged, was interviewing an admissions officer for Brooklyn School of Law. And he asked her, how did you get your personal statement done? When she was applying to law school. And was it her? She said, oh, I wrote 4 different personal statements and I handed those out to 5 different people. And I asked them all of these questions from the 4 separate essays. And then she selected the strongest essay of that. I'm not trying to scare anyone. I'm just saying that is potentially how much work you could do if you want to position yourself strongly. It's easier to write the more you write. Also, just want to put that out there. Asking consultants, what did you learn about me? For example, if you have in your personal statement, there are other areas for like things that introduce trauma. There are other areas for diversity, but with a personal statement, if you say, what did you learn about me? And say that your personal statement is talking, at the top of my head is like you have like, you have disabilities or you have like medical issues. If the whole personal statement is just telling me what the doctor has said, I haven't learned a lot about you and your personality. So that's what we're getting at there. Would you want to meet me? Does each part of the story make sense? Like why I'm including it? And for me, my favorite, if like, how does this fit in with everything else I'm presenting, which can be very difficult. And the last thing I'm going to share with you before we open up for questions is an example of, I feel like I'm like giving you all my baby here. This is an example, and I'm going to throw the link up here, and I think you're looking at it right now. Can everyone see this spreadsheet? Okay, I'm seeing one on our heads. This is an example, and I've tried to make it not pertaining to me, but this is an example of the way that I personally, you are looking at edited version of how I keep track of the different materials that I'm sending to each school. So I have, like, for example, you would have more match schools, 2 schools that are a reach school, 4, I would say up to 4 schools, maybe, like more schools that you feel that your stats match with, and some safety schools. You would have the website link here because you need to follow directions. Everyone gets your transcript. Everyone gets an LSAT. Personal statement. You can see here that some of them are 3 pages, some of them are 10 points, some of them are 11 point. It's color coded by which materials are going to go to each school. You can see some of them have a blue optional essay. I have letters of recommendation. Some of them have 2, some of them have 2 to 3. There are different things here, early decision agreement dates, and then my favorite resources. This is our email, Ayaka and I. If you have any follow-up questions, we're about to open up the floor to questions. We'll only have about 12 minutes. In the past, we've run out of time, so please email us. Another one of my favorite resources is our Unplugged YouTube channel. You can see lots of good things there. I love D&Z from Michigan. And also, just another favorite is I love Akeisha Anderson. She's incredible. You can go check that out as well. Does anybody have any questions about this spreadsheet in particular, or so like what's going on here? I just want everyone to see how the more schools you're applying to, there's just different materials that they request, and it's important that you track that. I think also we've gotten a lot of questions about school specific things, and if you're looking at your application as a puzzle, it can start to get confusing or murky in terms of where you're placing these different stories about yourself and how these are showing up for every single school. Nice. All right. I think, Ayaka, do you have anything to share, or anybody have any questions?
I know we got a bunch of questions coming into our email box. I do want to address a couple big things. So first, if you are an international student and looking for admissions into law school, really suggest you reach out directly to admissions at the school you're looking for, and every single admissions officer I've talked to, director of admissions, any admissions officer, they are so very nice. They're willing to sit down with you and walk you through the application process. So really, the schools are asking for different things. Even for domestic students, they're asking for different things. So for international, there's extra tests, like you might need the TOEFL, you might need other, English proficiency tests and all that. So really talk to the school and ask them, what they're looking for in an international student. It doesn't hurt you. Some law schools are very accommodating to the international students, and they pride themselves in having, top tier international students at their school. But you really want to have that information before you get to the application. So, and that's my piece there. There's some questions about the resume and whether, having a certain job is better than another. Is it okay to, not have a job at a certain point? Maybe you were focused on undergrad, so you might not have had a job in your undergrad. Your resume is your professional history. So it starts whenever it starts. I don't think you need to explain that you didn't have a job during undergrad. I'm sure you had other extracurricular activities. You might have been you might have had a super heavy workload at school. So I don't think you need to explain any of that. In terms of gaps, there are different asks from schools. So make sure you read the websites. There are schools out there who say, hey, if you have a gap, you have a gap, and that's fine. And there are schools out there that ask for, if you have 3 months or more of a blank in your resume, please explain that in your addendum. So there are directions out there. If you are unsure about anything, ask that specific school whether you need to include that in your resume or not. And there's 100 reasons why you might have a gap in your resume. You could have been traveling, you could have been moving between jobs, you could have moved continents. There's different things out there. And then prestige of jobs. I've never heard of an admissions officer say one job is better than another. Never, right? And Alyssa, I remember there was someone like a year ago who asked, like, is it okay to have multiple part-time jobs on their resume? And the admissions officer was like, of course, we all have to pay our bills. We're all working, and there's no shame in having one job or over another. And just because one seems more prestigious than the other doesn't give that person more merit, right? So there's no choice of job that is more likely to get you into law school than another. So hopefully that clears that up about resumes. I see a couple questions in the chat. I know, Alyssa, you're answering some of them.
I wanted to actually, answer Christina's. You're picking up on exactly what I was going to share.
Yeah. So yes. So I suggest as a habit, you put your LSAC number on all documents you're submitting. So personal statement, diversity statement, resume, just put it on the top right or top left, whichever makes sense for you in that header, just so they know and can control the documents that are coming in. If you have been out of school for 5+ years, you need to add your college activities on the resume. I think that depends. If it is something that's informed your career and you can kind of see that line, it might be nice to have it. Maybe it's some, mention at the bottom of like work experience or experience during undergrad and kind of write it out. There's some experience that, if it was like 1 week of internship or something like that, which, we have stuff like that out there in undergrad, and you're 5 years out and you have so much more experience to talk about, it's probably not as important. There's some stuff that I've dropped off my resume because my resume without editing is 4+ pages, just because of the work experience. I have international work experience, and I've been out of school 5+ years. So those small things that we've done in undergrad become less and less important. So really, maybe it is just one line on your resume if you are at that point.
Right. And it all depends. Like Ayaka and I have talked about this before. I think actually in our Wednesday night class, which will be published both on the podcast and on YouTube, it was just this following Wednesday, we talked a lot about resumes. We called it Resume 1-on-1. And we both shared that Ayaka and I we get along so well, but we're such extremely different candidates. For example, I had a very different undergrad experience that just happens to, I have a 2-page resume, and my undergrad experience happens to take up 1 page on my resume because that's how many things were going on there. So I don't have to knock it because I've been out of school for 7 years. That information is actually extremely relevant because it's my last upper education and I'm applying to go into education. So there's also that really important note there that you are applying for an academia setting. So what you did in academia is relevant. It just really depends. We have another question coming in here.
Yeah, master's degrees. So your master's degree will not affect your undergraduate GPA. So if you're looking for a GPA boost from an undergraduate degree, it's not going to boost that for you. It may show if you have been out of school for a bit, or if you felt like you didn't show up strongly academically in your undergrad, and you want to show admissions that you can show up strongly in in the classroom, that may be something that can help you in your application. The other piece is, if you need someone to write a letter of rec and you feel like you would be stronger, you would have a stronger relationship with someone if you do that master's degree, sure. But if you can't tell, it's not a definite yes, right? Like there are caveats to getting that master's degree, you're pushing out your application a couple of years. So, that might be something that you might consider. Is that something that you want to do? But it's not going to.
It's something you want to do, really. Do you want to do that?
Right. And, you might end up saying like, this was not something that you wanted to pursue, but you did it anyway for that boost, and it didn't pan out. There's a lot of things to consider there, but I think you have to look at your application, what you have currently, and is it going to help all pieces of that, right?
I'm seeing a lot of questions that really fall into this same category. And what's kind of happening right now is we are getting a lot of questions that I feel are coming from a place of, how do I make myself look more impressive? Like, what is more impressive? That is not a good direction to come from. Your application should be a direct reflection of exactly what interests you. What does interest you? What are you driven by? What are your career goals? That is the most impressive application, is when you can articulate who you are, why you're applying, and what you're most interested in doing with your life and how you spend your time. And that also goes into something I wanted to mention about the resume in terms of like, what do I put on there? What do I not put on there? As we spoke about earlier, there's an opportunity. It's not fixed in terms of your professional experience. For example, if you are someone who in your transcript or your undergrad have everything in terms of like biology, for example, say that everything in your interests, everything professionally is pointing to one section of something that tells who you are, and you have space, check in with the school. But say, for example, you're incredibly interested in like classical French literature, you can say interests and say classical French literature from this exact time period, because you have an opportunity to show more sides of yourself if you are genuinely interested in that. And again, some schools they'll say, I don't really care about your interests, but that is a hyper specific example of, it doesn't have to always be professional. What the resume job is to do is to show how you control the way that you spend your time. They want to make sure you're not watching a lot of television, or if you are, for a reason. So a lot of questions that we're getting are like sort of falling into that. And a lot of the answers to that are, is that really who you are? Is that really where you want to put that? I know like Dahlia asked a really great question in terms of it for someone who's a minority, where does being a minority have like, and that's a big part of who you are, like how do you draw the line? It's just your choice for that, I would say. What do you think, Ayaka?
No, I think you're right. And, I know what Alyssa said may sound harsh. I think the base message is like, you are enough to go to law school. Like, you as a person is enough, right? There's no extraordinary thing you need to do to get into law school. So I think that's the base message there. And so that's why we're like, you want to be your authentic self when you're doing the application. Now, and I know there's a question from Kendall as well about personal statement. And I think personal statement for me is very much who you are, right? And if you're being a minority is part of who you are, and that's the story that you need to tell, that you want to tell, then I think that's absolutely fine to put in your personal statement. Your diversity statement, and I know we had a question about this in our inbox, but your diversity statement isn't bound by race, ethnicity, gender, religion. Like, it's none of that. And if you look at almost any school's diversity statement that have a diversity statement prompt, it is they're saying, what makes you an unique candidate to our school. And that can be job experience, that can be, something much more than all those, in general diversity categories that we have. So really think about that. If you had an interesting job, or if you come from a dancer background like Alyssa, that is diversity, and, and schools are looking for it. So you don't have to be bound by, race, ethnicity, any of that. And just to address Kendall's question a little bit further, leadership experience versus volunteer experience, I think if your resume is split straight down the middle between leadership and volunteer, then I think that's completely, I mean, either way, it's completely up to you, right? Of which one you feel more passionate about. But if you're like, oh, I need volunteer experience, and you have maybe one experience from years ago that you're saying has, has this magnificent impact on your life, but you don't have volunteer experience after that, then I think that's something that's like, maybe that's not a convincing conversation in your personal statement. So you really want to think about how that shows up in your application as a whole, right? Either way, it's good to have both, but you can only really talk about maybe one or two things in your application. So nice. Really think about what you're putting in there. We are at the top of the hour. So thank you all for joining us today on your Sunday. We are always here at the admissions@LSAT Unplugged email. It is Alyssa and I answering those emails. So if you have any questions that weren't answered, and I know we didn't get to all of them, but feel free to send them in, and hopefully we'll see you on another one of these sessions.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.